Dr. Zita Weber, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's said in Australia that 40% of marriages end in divorce. How many of these are caused by adultery, or in fact, is any adultery even the true reason for people to claim to want to separate?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because certainly the women whom I interviewed for my book, and there were 12 women who shared their lived experiences with me, it wasn't always the case when they were discovered or they decided to confess that it was the end of the marriage. And also, having been a couples counsellor in the past, it wasn't my experience that infidelity, if you like, on either side or both, necessarily meant the end of a marriage. There could be other things that are happening in a marriage to cause the parties to separate.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, in your book, you explain nicely about the many varied reasons why people take on other lovers. Mm-hmm. It's not simple. There aren't sort of general reasons. And I was just so impressed that you were able to be very, what's the word?
Non-judgmental?
Non-judgmental, thank you. Yeah. And for me, reading it, I found my stomach in knots. I don't know why, being a married woman maybe, thinking of if I could cheat, if my partner did, how I would feel, all those effects, and it just keeps you turning the pages, wanting to know these people's experiences, I have to say. But I just came back to your non-judgmental pace, and it was very refreshing. And how did you maintain that? Obviously, it's because of your background and experience.
Yeah. Well, I think that says it all, really, because I have dealt with people in the past, in a professional capacity, who did find themselves in this place. And my experience has always been that if there's goodwill in the relationship, in the marriage, the primary relationship, then people can come through it with some help and a lot of work on their part, because it is a matter of looking at, I guess, the breach of trust, the betrayal, the feelings on both sides, which, as you say, I try to point out are very complex. Is that you really can't reduce them simplistically to A, B, and C. But if there's goodwill and a determination from both parties to work on things, then I think people can rebuild trust. But there has to be that goodwill. That's absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm. And what I also found really interesting was that all of the women had their reasons, even though they were complex, and they made choices to take on lovers, even though some of them had found themselves in it. Inevitably, there were choices involved, and so they knew the risks, the pros and cons. Is there a reason why people do go for it, even though they've made such a big promise and a commitment, though? How does that not weigh in the back of their mind and stop them? How do people not stop themselves?
Well, I think some women and some men reach a point in their lives or in their relationship where they find that something is essentially missing. And I think a lot of people fight against finding that elsewhere, and perhaps they try to find it in that primary relationship. But if it doesn't happen, then I guess they weigh up the pros and cons of perhaps straying elsewhere, if you like, although I don't like to use those sort of laden words, but in fact, moving out of the relationship into another to find that missing ingredient. But as you say, in all of the stories that unfolded for me from these women, it was the case that there was something missing in the relationship and they sought it elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, that it wasn't always sex, although sex was a big part for some of the women, but for others it was perhaps a bigger emotional connection with a partner. Perhaps it was finding some sort of mutual respect society that they no longer had with their primary partner. So it's really important to understand that people don't go looking for something if it's all available to them in the primary relationship.
Mm-hmm. And have they tended, I didn't gauge that people had communicated with their partners their need or what they felt was missing. That was what I found shocking as well. Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you, or am I mistaken? Did they try?
I think some of them probably did try, but sometimes it's difficult because, we do know from a lot of studies in the past that there are different communication styles that men and women have.
Very true.
Again, without being Mars and Venus about it. You know?
Yeah.
There are different communication styles, different expressive styles, and sometimes these styles don't dovetail very nicely. So sometimes if the women are saying something that the men don't understand, then, you know, it will forever go missing. Or sometimes the men are blind to certain things that the women are saying. And women on the whole, the research has shown us, are much more sensitive to context, much more empathic, much more self-aware about the effects of their behaviour on other people and other people's behaviour on them, etc. And all that starts as part of the socialisation that mothers give their little girls from the age of 2 onwards, we're told in the research. So boys and men don't have that in a sense. So sometimes the different expressive styles and communication styles aren't working for a particular partnership. And in one of the stories where the woman ends up having a no-sex love affair, I don't know if you remember that one, but she's a woman who was intensely sexualised by her husband, who's a highly sexualised person, and also they'd been part of the swinging scene in the 1980s. She was actually looking for a huge emotional connection that she felt she could never have with her husband, but because of her background and everything that dictated for her over the years, she didn't feel she could leave that marriage and the children, although they were grown up by that stage. But that whole context, but she was very sensitive to the fact that she needed something, and this other man with whom she didn't consummate the relationship, but she felt she was having an affair because it was such a highly emotionally charged connection.
And is marriage null and void? I mean, why are people still getting married? They're basically writing their own rules as to what can go on. Are you seeing, you know, besides these stories and the women that you've spoken with and have been so brave to share their stories, what do you think is the future for marriage in general?